Lego fans across North America just got hit with a devastating blow, and it all started with a Trump trade policy that was supposed to protect American businesses. But instead of strengthening the U.S. economy, Trump's elimination of the de minimis rule has created chaos for consumers, small businesses, and even beloved services like Lego's Pick a Brick program. We're talking about thousands of Lego pieces suddenly disappearing from online stores, Canadian customers getting caught in the crossfire of American trade wars, and a perfect example of how poorly planned tariff policies can backfire spectacularly. So what exactly happened here? How did a trade rule designed to combat Chinese imports end up hurting American and Canadian Lego enthusiasts? And why are Canadians paying the price for America's trade disputes? To understand this mess, we need to dive deep into the de minimis exemption, Trump's aggressive tariff strategy, and how one executive order managed to disrupt global supply chains in ways nobody anticipated. Let's start with the basics. The de minimis exemption, Latin for lacking significance or importance, has been a cornerstone of American trade policy since 1938. Originally created to save the federal government time and money by not collecting duties on imported goods worth $1 or less, this threshold has grown dramatically over the decades. By 1990, it was raised to $5, then to $200 in 1993, and finally to $800 in 2015 under the Obama administration's Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act. That $800 threshold made the United States one of the most generous countries in the world when it came to duty-free imports. To put this in perspective, most other nations set their de minimis thresholds much lower, often under $200. This generous policy was designed to facilitate trade, reduce administrative costs, and keep prices low for American consumers. For nearly a decade, it worked exactly as intended, allowing millions of small packages to flow into the United States without the bureaucratic overhead of customs processing. But then came the explosion in e-commerce. Between 2015 and 2024, the volume of de minimis shipments entering the United States skyrocketed from 134 million packages to over 1.36 billion, a tenfold increase. That's an average of 4 million packages per day crossing American borders without paying import duties. The vast majority of these shipments came from Chinese e-commerce giants like Temu, Shein, and AliExpress, which built their entire business models around exploiting this loophole to offer Americans incredibly cheap goods. This is where Trump saw an opportunity to strike back at what he perceived as unfair trade practices. Throughout his campaign and presidency, Trump consistently argued that other countries, particularly China, were taking advantage of America's generous trade policies.
Do you know we put a 50% tariff on India on oil? You're going to see a lot more.
So this is a taste of
You're going to see a lot more. You're going to see so much secondary sanctions.
And that 50% tariff has kicked in. President Trump has followed through with his threat to secondary sanction India over the country's continued purchasing of Indian oil. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Brendan Murray, who tracks global trade for us. Brendan, India had attempted to avoid this, but not so. They get the 50% tariff rate starting today.
Yeah, exactly. That 50% tariff is going to hit more than half of India's exports to the U.S., textiles in particular, and things like jewelry as well. There are some things that are exempt, like electronics and smartphones, so those were sort of carved out of this. But there's no question that this is going to cut off a lot of trade between the U.S. and India. Now, India has been about the number 9 ranked trading partner in goods with the U.S., and that's been the case pretty steadily over the past decade or so. So it's not a huge amount of commerce, but it's a decent sized trading partner that is definitely going to test the pain threshold of a lot of Indian exporters.
And of course, this is over Russian oil. I think I said Indian oil.
The administration's approach to trade has been nothing if not aggressive, with recent moves including imposing secondary sanctions and 50% tariffs on India over their purchases of Russian oil, hitting more than half of India's exports to the United States. This represents one of the administration's first uses of extremely high tariffs to accomplish geopolitical goals, showing just how far they're willing to go. The Trump administration's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Customs and Border Protection data showed that 90% of all cargo seizures in fiscal year 2024 originated as de minimis shipments. This includes dead 98% of narcotic seizures and 97% of counterfeit items seized at the border. Drug cartels and other criminal organizations had indeed learned to exploit the de minimis exemption to smuggle fentanyl and other dangerous substances into the United States by hiding them in packages that received less scrutiny due to their low declared value. Trump's first move came in April 2025, when he signed an executive order eliminating the de minimis exemption specifically for packages from China and Hong Kong. This was framed as part of his broader strategy to combat the flow of synthetic opioids into the United States, with the administration arguing that Chinese manufacturers were using the exemption to ship fentanyl precursors and finished drugs to American consumers. The initial China-specific ban created immediate chaos. Companies like Temu announced they were overhauling their shipping models, promising that pricing for U.S. consumers would remain unchanged. But American buyers quickly complained of higher prices and items being out of stock as companies struggled to adapt to the new tariff structure. Shipping companies like DHL temporarily suspended certain shipments, and even major carriers like FedEx added new surcharges for imports from affected countries. But Trump wasn't finished. On July 30th, 2025, he signed another executive order, this one eliminating the de minimis exemption for all countries worldwide, effective August 29, 2025. This wasn't just about China anymore, it was a complete overhaul of American trade policy that would affect every single international package worth $800 or less entering the United States. The justification was sweeping and ambitious. The Trump administration argued that the de minimis exemption had become a big scam that allowed foreign companies to undercut American manufacturers, facilitated drug smuggling, and cost the United States billions in lost tax revenue. They pointed to the explosive growth in de minimis shipments, with volume jumping from 115 million in all of fiscal year 2024 to 309 million just in the first half of fiscal year 2025, as evidence that the system was being systematically abused. Under the new rules, imported goods worth $800 or less would now be subject to their country of origin's applicable tariff rate, which could range anywhere from 10% to 50%. For packages sent through the International Postal Network, there would be specific duty rates, either a percentage of the item's value or flat fees ranging from $80 to $200 per item, depending on the country's tariff rate. This is where Lego's Pick-a-Brick program got caught in the crossfire. Pick-a-Brick is a beloved service that allows Lego enthusiasts to purchase individual bricks and pieces directly from the company. It's particularly popular among adult fans who need specific pieces for custom builds, replacement parts for damaged sets, or rare elements that aren't available in regular retail sets. The program operates through two different inventory systems: bestseller pieces that are stored and shipped from Lego's US warehouse, and standard pieces that come directly from the company's main warehouse in Billund, Denmark. For North American customers, this distinction had never mattered before. Both types of pieces were readily available and shipped without additional fees thanks to the de minimis exemption. But when Trump's global de minimis suspension took effect on August 29th, everything changed overnight. Those standard pieces coming from Denmark would now be subject to a 15% tariff, plus additional customs processing fees and delays. Rather than pass these costs on to consumers or deal with the administrative nightmare of collecting duties on thousands of small shipments, Lego made the decision to suspend standard piece availability for North American customers entirely. The impact was immediate and devastating for Lego fans. Thousands of pieces, estimates suggest around 2,000 different elements, suddenly disappeared from the Pick-a-Brick website. Customers who had carefully curated shopping carts full of specific pieces for upcoming projects found their orders canceled or incomplete. A message on Lego's North American Pick-a-Brick site now reads, "Standard pieces are temporarily unavailable. You can still shop our bestseller range, which includes thousands of the most popular bricks and pieces ready to order." But here's where the situation becomes particularly absurd. Canadian customers are being punished for American trade policies they had no part in creating. Canada isn't imposing any new tariffs or duties on Lego shipments. Canadian trade policy hasn't changed at all. But because Lego's back-end systems treat North America as a single shipping region, Canadian customers are losing access to the same thousands of pieces as their American counterparts. This is a perfect example of how poorly planned trade policies can create unintended consequences that hurt innocent parties. Canadian Lego fans are understandably frustrated, with many taking to Reddit and other forums to express their anger at being lumped in with the US for a trade dispute that isn't their fight. As one Canadian commenter put it, "I'm just so sad to be Canadian sometimes. The USA does something stupid once again, and Canada has to suffer just because we're neighbors." The broader impact extends far beyond Lego. International shipping companies have suspended or modified their services to the United States as they scramble to figure out how to handle the new paperwork requirements and duty collection processes. DHL, FedEx, and other major carriers have announced temporary suspensions, increased fees, and longer processing times for shipments to the United States. Small businesses are being hit particularly hard. Take Kristen Traynor, who runs a boutique called Diesel and Lulu's in Connecticut. Over 70% of her inventory comes from small fashion houses in France, Italy, and Spain, with orders that typically fall under the old $800 threshold. She estimates that a simple linen sundress that cost $30 wholesale at the beginning of the year will now cost $43, a price increase that could force her out of business entirely. Similarly, specialty retailers who import unique products that aren't manufactured in the United States are facing impossible choices. Rugby equipment importers, for example, might need to raise prices by 50% on Italian-made goggles that took 2 years to get approved by international sporting bodies and have no viable American alternative. The irony is that Trump's policy, designed to protect American businesses and workers, is actually hurting many of the small businesses and consumers it was supposed to help. While large corporations can absorb the additional costs and administrative burdens of the new tariff system, small importers and specialty retailers are being priced out of the market entirely. Meanwhile, the policy's effectiveness at achieving its stated goals is questionable at best. Experts point out that most fentanyl and synthetic opioids enter the United States through the southern border with Mexico, not through small packages subject to the de minimis exemption. Companies determined to evade tariffs can easily engage in what trade experts call the Tijuana two-step, shipping a $1,500 package from China to Mexico, then splitting it into two $750 packages and sending them separately to the United States. The timing couldn't be worse for consumers and businesses. With the holiday shopping season approaching, many international sellers have simply stopped shipping to the United States entirely, rather than deal with the uncertainty and complexity of the new rules. Bricklink, the popular marketplace for Lego parts and sets, has seen many Canadian and international sellers cut off American buyers completely. For Lego fans specifically, this means that the extensive secondary market that has developed around rare and hard-to-find pieces is being severely disrupted. Many adult fans of Lego rely on these markets to source specific pieces for large-scale custom builds or to complete vintage sets. The suspension of pick a brick. Standard pieces combined with reduced availability from international Bricklink sellers is creating a perfect storm of scarcity and rising prices. The situation is particularly frustrating because it highlights how interconnected modern supply chains have become, and how difficult it is to implement sweeping trade policies without creating unintended consequences. Lego's decision to treat North America as a single shipping region made perfect sense when trade policies were relatively stable and predictable. But when one country suddenly changes its entire approach to small package imports, companies are forced to make difficult choices about how to adapt their operations.
Mr. Dominic LeBlanc is here right now in Washington. He met with Donald Trump's Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, this morning and posted a photo online calling it a productive meeting. LeBlanc's office says it lasted about 90 minutes, and it's all part of Canada's efforts to try and get the Trump administration to drop or at least lower a series of tariffs hitting Canadian sectors hard. Here's what the Prime Minister said today.
Aluminum, steel, autos, copper, They happen to have a specific on copper, and then, of course, lumber, softwood lumber, which has been an issue. So those are the areas where immediately we are focused on improving the outcomes. In order to do that, we will have to look at other areas where we can have win-win cooperation, other areas.
Today's meeting here in Washington comes after the Prime Minister announced last week that he would drop some retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. because he says he was given assurance by Donald Trump over the phone that it would intensify talks.
And Ashley, you've learned more details about how this meeting came about. What can you tell us?
JP, the Canadian source tells me that after the Prime Minister's announcement that he would drop some of those countermeasures, that Mark Carney and Donald Trump exchanged texts and that they agreed LeBlanc would come here to Washington for these talks. The source also said there was a recognition from the American side that Canada had taken.
Interestingly, there are signs of potential progress on the broader trade front. Canadian Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc recently held a 90-minute productive meeting with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in Washington, with discussions running longer than scheduled. This followed Canada's decision to drop some retaliatory tariffs after receiving assurances that it would intensify talks. The meetings represent Canada's efforts to get the Trump administration to drop or lower tariffs, hitting Canadian sectors including aluminum, steel, autos, copper, and lumber. LEGO hasn't issued an official statement about when or how they might restore standard piece availability to North American customers. The company's website simply refers to the situation as a pause with no timeline for resolution. Industry observers suggest that LEGO might eventually decide to ship more pieces in bulk to their U.S. warehouse to make them available as bestseller items. But this would require significant changes to their inventory management and distribution systems. The broader implications of Trump's de minimis elimination extend far beyond toys and small consumer goods. International postal services are struggling to implement new systems for collecting duties and taxes on millions of small packages. The administrative burden on U.S. Customs and Border Protection has increased dramatically, potentially leading to longer processing times and backlogs at ports and mail facilities. Consumer advocacy groups warn that the policy will ultimately result in higher prices for American consumers, particularly those with lower incomes who rely on inexpensive imported goods. The Consumer Federation of America notes that while the policy might benefit some domestic manufacturers, the costs will be borne primarily by consumers in the form of higher prices, shipping delays, and reduced product selection. Trade policy experts are watching this situation closely as a test case for how aggressive unilateral trade actions can disrupt global commerce. The United States' decision to eliminate its de minimis exemption entirely puts it at odds with most other developed countries, which maintain some form of low-value threshold to facilitate small-scale trade and reduce administrative costs. For now, North American LEGO fans are left to adapt as best they can. Some are turning to domestic suppliers and alternative sources for hard-to-find pieces, while others are simply putting their building projects on hold until the situation resolves. The sense of frustration is palpable in online LEGO communities, where fans who had nothing to do with US-China trade disputes find themselves unable to access the pieces they need for their hobby. This situation perfectly encapsulates the challenges of implementing trade policy in an interconnected globe, economy. What started as a targeted effort to address specific concerns about Chinese imports and drug smuggling has evolved into a sweeping change that affects millions of consumers, thousands of small businesses, and entire industries that depend on cross-border trade. The LEGO pick-a-brick suspension may seem like a small issue in the broader context of international trade, but it represents something larger: the way that poorly planned trade policies can create widespread disruption and unintended consequences that extend far beyond their intended targets. Canadian LEGO fans didn't choose to be part of America's trade war with China, but they're paying the price anyway. As this situation continues to unfold, it serves as a reminder that in today's interconnected world, trade policies don't exist in isolation. Every tariff, every exemption, and every trade rule has the potential to create ripple effects that reach far beyond their intended scope. Whether the benefits of eliminating the de minimis exemption will ultimately outweigh the costs remains to be seen. But for now, LEGO fans across North America are learning firsthand how trade policy can directly impact their daily lives in ways they never expected. The question moving forward is whether companies like LEGO will find ways to adapt to this new reality, or whether consumers will simply have to accept reduced product availability and higher prices as the new normal.
It's still a bit of a wait and see, is how I would term it. We are starting to see challenges in the economic data in the United States. But when it comes to trade is a bit of a slow-moving wave. So tariffs are put in place, but the U.S. consumer doesn't necessarily feel them for several months. We know a lot of these price increases in the United States from the tariffs that have been put in place are starting to hit the shelves. We are going to continue to see more of that in the U.S. as we get into September, October, and certainly as we get into the holiday shopping season. So my instinct is policymakers are going to start to hear from their constituents over the next several months. We will start to see it bear out in the economic data, and it's going to be very interesting to see if that starts to color the negotiations from the American perspective. I would say in particular, as we start to get into the CUSM.
The economic challenges are already starting to appear in U.S. data, with price increases from tariffs hitting American shelves and set to continue through the holiday shopping season. Policymakers will likely hear from constituents over the next several months as these economic impacts become more visible, potentially influencing upcoming trade negotiations. Either way, this episode demonstrates how quickly and dramatically trade policies can reshape entire industries and consumer experiences, often in ways that policymakers never intended or anticipated.